The girl sat on that porch peeling an apple like she was already dead inside. $50. That's what her father wanted for her. 50 goddamn dollars. Like she was a sack of grain or a broken down horse. I should have walked away. Should have let the bastard find some other fool. But I saw something in her eyes. Or maybe I saw nothing at all, which was worse. Because that emptiness? I recognized it. Knew exactly what came next if I left her there. So I paid the money, hated myself for it, and took her up the mountain. If you want to know how two broken people found something worth keeping in the wilderness, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And stay with me till the end. This one's worth it. The town didn't have a name worth remembering. Just another collection of weathered buildings squatting in the dust between nowhere and nothing. The kind of place where hope went to dry out and die. Cade Mercer had ridden down from his mountain cabin that Tuesday morning, wanting nothing more than 50 pounds of oats, some lamp oil, and to be gone before the sun climbed too high. He hated towns. Hated the noise, the questions, the way people looked at him like he was something dangerous that wandered too close to civilization, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely wrong. He'd tied Delilah, his mule, meaner than a rattlesnake with a headache, outside Hutchinson's feed and supply, and was halfway through the door when a voice stopped him cold. "Mr. Mercer, Cade Mercer, that you?" Cade froze, one boot on the threshold. He knew that voice. Virgil Harlan, farmer, drunk, the kind of man who wore his failures like a second skin and blamed everyone but himself for the stink. "Virgil." Cade didn't turn around. "Running low on daylight here. Just need a minute of your time." Footsteps scuffed closer. "Got a business proposition." Cade finally looked back. Virgil stood there grinning, all yellow teeth and desperation, his clothes hanging off him like they'd given up trying to fit properly. His eyes had that particular shine that came from starting the day with a bottle instead of breakfast. "Not interested," Cade said flatly. "Haven't even heard what I'm offering." "Don't need to." Answer's still no. But Virgil stepped closer anyway, dropping his voice to something almost conspiratorial. "Heard you're doing well up on that mountain. Got yourself a nice spread. Profitable." Cade's jaw tightened. His spread was 40 acres of rocky soil, a half-dozen goats, and enough solitude to keep the world at arm's length. Profitable wasn't the word he'd use. Survivable, maybe. Get to the point, or get out of my way. Virgil's grin widened, and something ugly flickered behind it. "Need to liquidate some assets. Times being what they are. Thought maybe you could use some help up there. Young, strong, knows how to work, won't complain, won't run off. Yours for $50. The words took a moment to settle into meaning. When they did, Cade felt something cold slide down his spine. "You're drunk." "Sober as Sunday, friend. $50. She's yours. Hell of a bargain if you ask me." Cade's hand moved before his brain caught up, fisting in Virgil's shirt and slamming him back against the feed store's wall hard enough to rattle the windows. A few people on the street turned to look, then quickly found somewhere else to be. "Say that again," Cade growled, his face inches from Virgil's. "Real slow." Virgil's grin never wavered. If anything, it got wider. "Elma, my daughter. She's 18, healthy enough. Cooks, cleans, follows orders. $50 and you can do whatever you want with her. I sure as hell can't afford to feed her anymore." The world seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. Cade had seen terrible things in his life, had done a few himself that still woke him up at night. But this was different. This was casual evil, the kind that happened in broad daylight and expected applause for its practicality. He released Virgil's shirt and stepped back, fighting the urge to put his fist through the man's face. "You're sick. I'm practical." Virgil smoothed his shirt, still smiling. "World ain't kind to the sentimental, Mercer. You know that better than most." Cade turned to leave. Whatever fresh hell Virgil Harlan had conjured up for his daughter wasn't Cade's problem. Couldn't be. He'd spent 5 years building a life specifically designed to avoid other people's problems. "She's on the porch," Virgil called after him. "Right there. Take a look before you go playing the righteous man." Cade kept walking. Made it 3 steps. Then stopped. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the tone in Virgil's voice, that particular mix of triumph and cruelty that said he knew exactly which strings to pull. Maybe it was something else, something buried deeper that Cade didn't want to examine too closely. Against every instinct screaming at him to keep moving, he turned his head. The girl sat on the porch 15 feet away. Elma. She was thin in a way that spoke of years rather than days. Her dress patched so many times it was hard to tell what the original fabric had been. Dark hair pulled back in a braid that had probably been neat that morning, but was already coming loose. She held a small knife and an apple, peeling it in one long continuous ribbon with the kind of concentration that seemed to exist outside of time. What stopped Cade's breath wasn't how she looked. It was how she didn't react. She'd heard every word. Had to have. But she just kept peeling that apple, her face blank as fresh paper, like her father selling her for the price of a decent saddle was exactly what she'd expected from the day. No tears, no protests, no desperate looks for help, just acceptance. That emptiness was worse than any scream could have been. See? Virgil appeared at Cade's elbow, his breath hot and sour. Knows her place? Won't give you a lick of trouble. Trained her well. The way he said trained made Cade's stomach turn. $50, Virgil pressed. That's all I'm asking. Hell, that's less than a good horse. Cade's mind raced through options, none of them good. He could walk away. Should walk away. This wasn't his mess, wasn't his responsibility. He'd left civilization behind specifically to avoid moments like this. But if he walked away, someone else wouldn't. That was the piece that dug into him like a fishhook. This town had maybe 200 people on a good day, and Cade knew for a fact at least a dozen of them would jump at Virgil's offer before sundown. Men who'd see that blank acceptance and think it was permission. Men who'd take Virgil's "trained her well" as a feature rather than the horror it actually was. The girl, Elma, finished peeling the apple. She cut a slice, ate it with the same mechanical precision, and finally looked up. Their eyes met. Hers were brown, dark brown, like creek water in shadow, and completely, utterly empty. Cade had seen eyes like that before. In mirrors, mostly. In the faces of men who'd survived things they shouldn't have and came out the other side missing pieces they'd never get back. $30, he heard himself say. Virgil blinked. What? 30. Not a penny more. Cade's voice came out flat, emotionless. And you signed something. Paper that says you give up all claim to her. Forever. The haggling instinct lit up in Virgil's eyes. Now hold on. 50's already a bargain. 30 and a bill of sale, or you can try your luck with whoever else comes along. Your choice. The silence stretched. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The wind kicked up dust devils in the road. Virgil's smile cracked just a little. You'll regret this. I already do. Paper. Now. 20 minutes later, Cade stood outside the general store with a handwritten document that made his skin crawl just holding it. Virgil had scrawled his signature, barely legible, like even his handwriting was drunk, and taken the $30 with hands that shook just enough to rattle the coins. Pleasure doing business, Virgil said, already eyeing the saloon across the street. Cade didn't respond. He folded the paper, tucked it in his jacket, and walked back toward the feed store porch. Elma hadn't moved. She'd finished the apple, set the knife aside, and now sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing in particular. When Cade's shadow fell across her, she looked up without surprise or hope, or fear. Just waiting. Get your things, Cade said quietly. She blinked once. Don't have things. Nothing? No, sir. The Koryamut sir hit him wrong, but he didn't correct it. Not yet. Then let's go. She stood without a word, smoothing her dress in a gesture that seemed automatic, followed him to where Delilah stood tied to the hitching post. The mule's ears went flat immediately. Easy, Cade warned, moving to block Delilah's head before she could bite. She's got a temper. Best keep your distance. But Elma didn't keep her distance. She walked right up to Delilah, slow and calm, and did something that made Cade's jaw drop. She reached out and touched the mule's nose. Delilah, who'd kicked 2 men and bitten a dog just last month, went completely still. Elma's fingers traced the line of the mule's jaw with a gentleness that seemed to come from somewhere deep and untouched by whatever hell she'd lived through. Delilah's ears came forward. Actually forward. Then the damn mule lowered her head and leaned into the girl's touch like she was some kind of miracle worker. I'll be damned, Cade muttered. Elma's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something in that neighborhood. She's lonely, the girl said softly. Can tell. She's mean. Same thing sometimes. The observation landed with unexpected weight. Cade found himself studying this girl, this woman, really, despite looking younger than her years, and wondering what else she saw that other people missed. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Used to. Been a while." "You'll ride with me then. It's a long way up." He swung into the saddle, then reached down. Elma took his hand without hesitation, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so thin. He pulled her up behind him, and she settled onto Delilah's back with practiced ease. "Hold on," Cade said. "Yes, sir." He was definitely going to have to do something about the "sir." They left town heading west, toward the mountains that rose like broken teeth against the sky. The trail started easy enough, a well-worn path used by loggers and trappers, but after the first mile it narrowed, climbing steadily through scrub oak and pine. Elma didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going or what would happen when they got there, just held on to the back of the saddle with both hands and kept her silence. The silence bothered Cade more than questions would have. "Name's Cade," he said after an hour of nothing but hoofbeats and wind. "Case you forgot." "I remember. Cade Mercer. Built a cabin up in the high country about 5 years back. Raise some goats, do some trapping. Keeps me fed." "Okay. You'll have your own space. Don't expect nothing from you except maybe help with meals if you're willing. You're not—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like lies. "You're not a servant or property. That paper your father signed. Only reason I got it was so he couldn't come back claiming ownership. Far as I'm concerned, you're free to leave whenever you want." Silence. "You hear me?" Cade asked. "Yes, sir." "And stop calling me sir. Just Cade." More silence. They climbed higher. The pine trees grew thicker, blocking out the afternoon sun in patches. The air got cooler, cleaner. Up here you could almost forget the world below existed. "Why'd you do it?" Her voice was so quiet, Cade almost missed it. "Do what?" "Pay him. You don't know me." Cade considered his answer carefully. "Knew if I didn't, someone worse would." "Worse than what?" "Than me." She didn't respond to that, but he felt her grip shift slightly on the saddle. The cabin appeared just as the sun started its descent toward the western peaks. It wasn't much. Single room, stone chimney, porch that Cade had built himself from lumber he'd hauled up piece by piece. A small barn stood 20 yards away, just big enough for Delilah and the goats. Behind it, a creek ran year-round, the sound of it a constant whisper through the trees. Cade helped Elma down, then unsaddled Delilah and led her to the barn. When he came back, Elma was still standing exactly where he'd left her, hands folded, waiting. "Inside," he said, nodding toward the cabin. She followed him in. The interior was sparse but clean. A fireplace dominated one wall. A table and 2 chairs sat near the window. A bed frame with a straw mattress occupied the far corner, blankets neatly folded at the foot. Shelves held supplies, canned goods, ammunition, a few books. A rifle rack mounted above the door. Elma's eyes moved across it all with that same blank efficiency, cataloging, calculating. "You take the bed," Cade said. "I'll make a pallet by the fire." "No." The word came out sharp enough to surprise them both. Elma's eyes widened slightly, like she'd shocked herself. "I mean, you don't have to do that." "I want to." "It's your bed. And you're my guest. I'm not—" She stopped, something cracking in her carefully maintained composure. "You paid for me. That makes me—" "Nothing," Cade interrupted firmly. "That makes you nothing except someone who got dealt a bad hand and needed a way out. The money? Only thing that means is your father can't come back claiming you're his. That's it." Elma stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "Look," Cade continued, softer now. "I know you got no reason to trust me. Probably got every reason not to. But I'm going to say this once, and you can believe it or not. You're safe here. I sleep by the fire because I want you to have space. Door's not locked. You want to leave, leave. You want to stay, stay. Your choice." Her face did something complicated. A dozen emotions trying to surface through years of learned blankness. None of them quite made it. "Okay," she whispered. "You hungry?" She nodded. "I'll make something." Cade moved to the shelves, pulling down cornmeal and salt pork. Behind him, he heard Elma's soft footsteps as she approached the table, then the quiet scrape of a chair. They ate fried cornmeal cakes and weak coffee as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Elma took small bites, eating with the same mechanical precision she'd used on the apple. Cade found himself watching her between his own bites, trying to figure out what the hell he'd gotten himself into. After dinner, she stood without being asked and started collecting plates. "You don't have to. Please." The word came out almost desperate. "Let me. I need to. Please." Cade nodded slowly. "All right." She washed the dishes in a basin of water he'd hauled from the creek that morning, her movements quick and practiced. Then she dried them, put them away, swept the floor even though it didn't need sweeping, straightened things that were already straight. Cade watched it all with growing unease. When she finally ran out of tasks, she stood in the middle of the room looking lost. "It's late," Cade said gently. "You should get some rest." "What do you want me to do?" The question caught him off guard. "Sleep? I mean, tomorrow. What do you need me to do?" "Whatever you want, I guess. There's no rules here." That seemed to confuse her more than comfort her. She nodded slowly, moved to the bed, and sat on the edge of it, fully clothed. Cade laid out his bedroll by the fireplace, added a log to keep the flames going through the night, and settled in. From the corner of his eye, he saw Elma lie down on top of the blankets, still in her dress, staring at the ceiling. "Elma?" "Yes?" "You can get under the covers. It's going to get cold tonight." A pause. "Okay." But she didn't move. Cade turned his face to the fire and closed his eyes, listening to the crackle of burning wood and the whisper of wind through the pines outside. Sleep didn't come easy. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were full of empty brown eyes and $50 transactions, and the particular kind of evil that wore a father's face. Morning came cold and gray. Cade woke to the smell of coffee. He sat up fast, disoriented, and found Elma at the stove, tending a pot over the fire. She'd found the coffee somehow, figured out how to use his battered percolator, and from the looks of it had been awake for a while. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. "Morning." She didn't turn around. "Hope you don't mind. Found the coffee in the tin." "No, that's fine." She poured him a cup, brought it to where he sat on the bedroll. Her hands were steady, her face carefully neutral. "Thank you," Cade said, taking the cup. She nodded and retreated to the table. They drank in silence. Outside, birds started their morning songs. The sun was still below the eastern peaks, but the sky had that quality of light that promised it wouldn't be long. "What day is it?" Elma asked suddenly. "Wednesday." "What do you do on Wednesdays?" Cade rubbed his face, thinking. "Check the fence lines. Make sure nothing's broken. See to the goats." "Can I help?" "If you want." "I want." So they did. Elma followed him out to the small pasture where he kept 6 goats, scraggly things that thrived on mountain grass and provided milk, cheese, and the occasional meat. She watched how he checked each animal, gentle but thorough, looking for signs of injury or sickness. "This one's Bessie," Cade said, scratching behind a particularly ornery nanny's ears. "She's the boss. Other 5 know it too." Elma reached out slowly, let Bessie sniff her hand, then copied Cade's scratching motion. The goat's eyes half closed in pleasure. "She likes you." "Animals are easier than people," Elma said quietly. "Ain't that the truth?" They moved along the fence line, Cade pointing out places where rails needed replacing, explaining how to spot rot before it became a problem. Elma listened with an intensity that went beyond polite attention. She was memorizing, calculating, learning. "You know anything about carpentry?" Cade asked. "A little. Helped Pa build a chicken coop once." It was the first time she'd mentioned her father without being prompted. Cade chose his next words carefully. "He teach you?" "Mostly I watched. He didn't like me asking questions." "You can ask questions here." She glanced at him, something flickering in those empty eyes. "Really?" "Really." They worked until noon, replacing fence rails and reinforcing posts. Elma's hands proved stronger than they looked, and she followed instructions without needing them repeated. When they finally headed back to the cabin for lunch, Cade noticed she was walking differently. Head up instead of down, shoulders back instead of hunched. Small changes. But changes. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Elma woke before dawn every morning. Cade suspected she didn't sleep much anyway, and had coffee ready by the time he opened his eyes. She cleaned, cooked, mended his clothes with stitches so small and precise they were almost invisible. She never asked for anything, never complained, never stopped moving. It worried him. On the fourth morning, Cade found her scrubbing the floor on her hands and knees, even though he'd scrubbed it himself just 2 days prior. "Elma!" She kept scrubbing. "Elma, stop." Her hand stilled, but she didn't look up. "Why are you doing that?" "It's dirty." "It's not. I cleaned it Monday." "I can make it cleaner." Cade crouched down beside her. "Is this what you did at your father's place? Worked all day every day?" Her jaw tightened. "Had to earn my keep." "You don't hear." "Then what am I supposed to do?" The question came out almost angry, and Cade realized with a cold certainty what was happening. She didn't know how to exist without being useful. Her entire life had taught her that her value began and ended with how much work she could produce. "Whatever you want," he said quietly. "I don't know what that means." "Then we'll figure it out together." She finally looked at him, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears if she'd let them fall. "You keep saying things like that. Like I matter." "You do." "Why?" "Because you're a person. That's all the reason you need." She shook her head slowly, like the concept was too big to fit inside her understanding of the world. Then she went back to scrubbing. Cade let her. Pushing harder would only make it worse. But that night, as they ate dinner, he tried something different. "I'm heading into town Friday," he said casually. "Need to pick up some supplies. Anything you want me to get?" Elma's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "What? You need anything? Thread, fabric, food you're craving? I can grab it while I'm there." She set her fork down carefully. "You're asking what I want?" "That's generally what people do when they ask what you want, yeah." Her face went through that complicated thing again, emotions trying to surface through practiced blankness. This time, a few made it through. Confusion. Disbelief. Something that might have been hope. "Nobody's ever asked me that before," she whispered. The words hit Cade like a physical blow. 18 years old, and nobody had ever asked her what she wanted. Not once. Not ever. "Well, I'm asking now," he said, keeping his voice steady, "and I'll keep asking until you believe your answer matters." Elma's eyes filled with tears that she clearly didn't want to shed. She blinked hard, looked down at her plate, blinked again. "I don't know," she managed. "That's okay. You've got till Friday to think about it." But the tears came anyway, silent and steady, rolling down her cheeks while she sat absolutely still. Cade didn't move, didn't try to comfort her. Somehow he knew she needed to feel this without someone trying to make it stop. When the tears finally slowed, Elma wiped her face with her sleeve and looked at him with eyes that were still empty, but now held something else too, something fragile and new. "Thread," she said quietly, "if it's not too much trouble. And maybe seeds? For a garden?" "What kind of seeds?" "Anything that grows. I used to have a garden. Before." "Consider it done." She nodded, picked up her fork, and went back to eating with hands that only shook a little. That night, for the first time since arriving, Elma got under the blankets instead of sleeping on top of them. Progress came in inches. Friday came with gray clouds and the smell of rain in the air. Cade loaded Delilah's saddlebags with furs he'd trapped over the winter. Not much, but enough to trade for supplies, and made sure the rifle was loaded before sliding it into its scabbard. Elma stood in the doorway watching him work, her hands twisted in her apron. "You sure you don't want to come?" Cade asked, tightening the last strap. She shook her head quickly. "Rather stay here." He understood. The town held nothing good for her, just memories and people who'd watched her father sell her and done exactly nothing about it. "I'll be back before dark," he said, swinging into the saddle. "There's stew on the stove if you get hungry." "And Elma?" "Yeah?" "Door locks from the inside. Use it." Something shifted in her expression, gratitude mixed with relief that he'd thought of it. She nodded. The ride down took half the time going up had. Delilah knew the trail well enough by now to navigate the switchbacks without much guidance. Cade's mind wandered as they descended, cataloging everything Elma had asked for. Thread, seeds, Simple things that somehow felt heavy with meaning. Town looked exactly the same as it had a week ago. Same dusty street, same tired buildings, same people going about their same tired lives. Cade tied Delilah outside the general store and went in. The conversation stopped the moment he crossed the threshold. 4 men stood near the counter, locals, all of them. Cade recognized 2 from the saloon, 1 from the blacksmith shop. They stared at him with expressions somewhere between curiosity and something darker. "Morning," Cade said flatly, moving past them toward the shelves. "Heard you bought yourself some company," one of them called out. "That true?" Cade kept walking. "Virgil's been running his mouth all week," another added. "Says you paid good money for his girl." "Virgil's a drunk and a liar," Cade said without turning around. "Believe what you want." He found the thread, multiple colors, because he hadn't asked which she needed, and he'd be damned if he'd make her specify. Then he moved to the seed display. Tomatoes, beans, squash, lettuce. He grabbed one of each, plus a few extras. Behind him, the men kept talking in voices just loud enough to make sure he heard. "Funny thing, taking in a girl like that. Mighty charitable. Or maybe not so charitable, if you know what I mean." Cade's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Engaging would only make it worse. These men wanted a reaction, wanted confirmation of whatever ugly story they'd already decided was true. He brought his items to the counter where old Mrs. Hutchinson stood with her ledger book, her face carefully neutral. "That everything?" she asked quietly. "Need lamp oil, too. 2 bottles." She nodded, adding it up. When she told him the total, Cade counted out the money and added an extra $1. "What's this for?" Mrs. Hutchinson asked. "Information. Virgil been in here this week?" Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Every day. Spending money like he's got it to burn." "He say where he got it?" "Didn't have to. Whole town knows." She met his eyes. "People are talking, Mr. Mercer. Let them talk. Some of what they're saying ain't kind. Never expected it to be." Mrs. Hutchinson studied him for a long moment, then pushed the extra $1 back across the counter. "Girl deserved better than Virgil Harlan for a father. Whatever you did, I expect it's better than what would have happened otherwise." It was the closest thing to approval Cade had heard in 5 years. He pocketed the $1 and gathered his purchases. Outside, the clouds had thickened. Rain was coming soon. Cade was loading the saddlebags when he heard boots on the boardwalk behind him. "We ain't done talking to you." He didn't have to turn around to know it was the same group from inside. Their footsteps were too deliberate, too coordinated. This had been planned. "I am," Cade said, finishing with the straps. "See, that's not real friendly." "Don't recall trying to be." One of them, the blacksmith's apprentice, barely 20 and full of the kind of stupid confidence that got men killed, stepped closer. "You think you're better than us? Come down here. Buy a man's daughter like she's livestock. Take her up your mountain to do who knows what." Cade turned slowly. The 4 men had spread out in a loose semicircle, blocking easy escape. Not an accident. "Move," Cade said quietly. "Or what? Or I'll move you." The apprentice grinned. "Like to see you try." Things might have escalated right there. Cade could see it in their postures, the way their hands hovered near their belts, but a voice cut through the tension like a knife. "That's enough." Everyone turned. Sheriff Dawes stood 10 feet away, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. He was older than Cade by a decade, gray in his beard, with eyes that had seen enough stupidity to recognize it forming. "These men bothering you, Mercer?" Dawes asked. "Just leaving, Sheriff." "Good idea." Dawes' gaze swept over the 4 men. "You boys got business elsewhere." "We were just elsewhere," Dawes repeated, his tone allowing no argument. The men dispersed slowly, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. The apprentice spat in the dirt before slouching away. "Appreciate it," Cade said. Dawes nodded. "Word of advice? Maybe stay away from town for a while. Let things settle." Wasn't planning on making a habit of visiting anyway. "The girl, she all right?" The question caught Cade off guard. "Why?" "Because Virgil Harlan's a mean drunk and a meaner father, and because I've been wearing this badge long enough to know the difference between a man running from something and a man trying to do right." Dawes paused. "Which one are you?" "Little of both, probably." "Honest answer." The sheriff's expression softened slightly. "She's safe up there? Safer than she was down here." Then I expect that's all that matters. Dawes tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Cade standing in the street with Delilah, and a growing sense that he'd somehow become responsible for something much bigger than he'd bargained for. The ride back up the mountain gave him too much time to think. When he finally reached the cabin, rain had started to fall in cold, steady sheets. He unsaddled Delilah quickly, rubbed her down, and sprinted for the cabin with the supplies tucked under his coat. Elma met him at the door, her face tight with worry. "You're soaked. It's raining. I can see that." She took the packages from him while he shrugged out of his wet coat. "Get by the fire before you catch your death." Cade obeyed, slightly stunned by the authority in her voice. She hung his coat to dry, then brought him a blanket and a cup of coffee that was still hot. "You didn't have to wait up," he said. "Wasn't tired." But the way she'd been standing at the door, the relief in her eyes when he appeared, she'd been worried. Actually worried about him. The realization sat strange in his chest. "Got your thread," Cade said, nodding toward the packages on the table. "And seeds. Wasn't sure which kind, so I got a few different." Elma moved to the table and carefully unwrapped the parcels. Her hands stilled when she saw the variety. 6 different packets of seeds, thread in every color the store had carried. "This is too much," she whispered. "It's what you asked for." "I meant 1 or 2. "I know what you meant." Cade wrapped the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Figured you'd earned the right to have choices." She picked up a packet of tomato seeds, turned it over in her hands like it was something precious. "Thank you." "Welcome." They fell into silence, listening to the rain hammer the roof. After a while, Elma started preparing dinner, salt pork and beans, simple but filling. She moved around the cabin with growing confidence, no longer asking permission for every small action. "People in town," Cade said eventually. "They're talking." Elma's hands paused over the pot. "About me?" "About both of us." "What are they saying?" He considered lying, decided against it. "Nothing good. Lot of assumptions about why I brought you up here." She set down the spoon carefully. "What kind of assumptions?" "The kind that say more about them than about us." Elma turned to face him, and for the first time since they'd met, her expression wasn't blank or carefully controlled. It was angry. "Let them think whatever they want," she said, her voice low and fierce. "They watched him sell me. Watched and did nothing. They don't get to judge what happens after." The anger looked good on her, better than the emptiness. "You're right," Cade said. "Damn right I'm right." She turned back to the stove, stirring with more force than necessary. Bunch of cowards with nothing better to do than make up stories. Cade found himself smiling despite everything. This was new. Elma with opinions, with fire, with the courage to voice what she thought. "What?" she asked, catching his expression. "Nothing. Just, it's good to hear you get mad." "I'm mad all the time. Just never had permission to show it before." "You've got permission here." She glanced at him over her shoulder, something softening in her face. "I'm starting to believe that." They ate dinner while the storm raged outside. The wind picked up around midnight, rattling the shutters and finding gaps in the walls to whistle through. Elma sat at the table after the dishes were done, examining her seeds by lamplight. "Where do you think I should plant them?" she asked. Cade looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "South side of the cabin gets the most sun. Soil's decent there too." "When should I start?" "Month, maybe, once the ground thaws proper." She nodded, carefully arranging the packets in a row. "Never had my own garden before." "Pa had one, but it was his. I just did what he told me." "This one's yours. Plant what you want, however you want." "What if I do it wrong?" "Then you'll learn and do it different next time. That's how it works." Elma traced the edge of a seed packet with one finger. "You make everything sound so simple." "Most things are. People just complicate them." "Maybe." The lamp flickered as a gust of wind hit the cabin. Elma looked toward the window, her face troubled. "Storm's getting worse," she said. "We're safe enough here. Cabins stood through worse." But she didn't look convinced. As the night deepened and the wind howled louder, Cade noticed her growing more tense, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine." She wasn't fine. When lightning cracked close enough to rattle the dishes, she flinched hard. "Elma, I said I'm fine." But her voice shook. and her face had gone pale. Cade set down the knife and moved to the table, pulling out the chair across from her. "You don't like storms." It wasn't a question. She swallowed hard. "Pa used to lock me in the root cellar during bad weather. Said I was too stupid to be trusted inside. Sometimes he'd forget to let me out after. Once it was 2 days. The casual cruelty of it hit Cade like a fist. Jesus. Dark down there, and cold. And the spiders. She cut herself off, shaking her head. "Sorry, you don't need to hear this." "I do if you need to say it." Lightning flashed again, closer this time. Thunder followed immediately, so loud it felt like the mountain itself was breaking apart. Elma's hands went white-knuckled on the table. Without thinking too hard about it, Cade reached across and covered one of her hands with his own. She went completely still. "You're not in a cellar," he said quietly. "You're in a warm cabin with a roof over your head and a fire that's not going anywhere. Storm can rage all it wants out there. Can't touch you in here." Elma stared at their hands like she couldn't quite process what was happening. Then, slowly, her fingers curled around his. "Can you?" She started, then stopped. "Never mind." "What?" "It's stupid." "Probably. Say it anyway." She took a breath. "Can you just talk? About anything. I just need to hear something other than the storm." So Cade talked. He told her about building the cabin 5 years ago, how he'd nearly fallen off the roof twice and had to rebuild the chimney 3 times before it drew smoke properly. Told her about the winter he'd gotten snowed in for 2 months straight and had to ration coffee so severely he'd considered just eating the grounds. Told her about Delilah, who he'd won in a card game from a trader who swore the mule was gentle as a lamb, a lie Cade had discovered approximately 30 seconds after taking the reins. Elma listened, her grip on his hand gradually loosening as the stories piled up. She even laughed once, a small sound that she immediately tried to swallow. "Don't," Cade said. "Don't what?" "Hide it when something's funny. Laugh if you want to laugh." "Wasn't sure I was allowed." "You're allowed everything here. That's the point." The storm continued through the night, but its power over Elma seemed to break. She finally released Cade's hand, though he noticed she didn't move away from the table, didn't retreat back into that careful blankness. Around 2 a.m, the worst of it passed. The wind died down to a low moan, the rain settling into a steady patter. "You should sleep," Cade said. "So should you." "Will, if you will." She smiled, actually smiled, small but real. "Deal." They settled into their respective spaces, Cade by the fire and Elma in the bed. But before she pulled the blankets up, she spoke into the darkness. "Cade?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For the hand thing, and the talking. Any time. I mean it. Nobody's ever—" She paused. "Nobody's ever just sat with me like that. When I was scared. Then they were fools." Silence. Then, so quiet, he almost missed it. "Maybe you're not so bad at this." "At what?" "Having someone around." Cade smiled at the ceiling. "Maybe you're not so bad at being around." Her laugh was soft but genuine. "Good night, Cade." "Good night, Elma." The days that followed developed their own rhythm, different from before. Elma still woke early, still made coffee and cleaned, but now she also asked questions. About the mountains, about the animals, about how things worked. She wanted to learn everything: how to track game, how to read weather patterns, how to identify which plants were edible and which would kill you. Cade taught her what he knew. One morning, about 2 weeks after the storm, she appeared in the doorway while he was splitting wood. "I want to learn how to shoot," she said. Cade paused mid-swing. "What?" "The rifle. I want to learn." He set down the axe. "Why?" "Because I never want to be helpless again." Her chin came up, defiant. "You said I could do what I wanted. This is what I want." Cade studied her, this woman who'd arrived like a ghost and was slowly becoming solid, real, dangerous in all the right ways. "All right," he said. "But we do it proper. None of this half-assed nonsense." "Deal." He fetched the rifle from inside, along with a box of ammunition. They walked to a clearing 100 yards from the cabin where Cade had set up targets before, old cans and bottles balanced on a fallen log. "First rule," he said, handing her the unloaded rifle. "Always assume it's loaded, even when you know it's not." "Why?" Because the one time you assume wrong is the time someone dies. Elma nodded seriously and took the rifle with careful hands. He showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. She listened with absolute concentration, absorbing every word. "Ready to try?" he asked. "Yes." He loaded a single round and stepped back. "That bottle on the left. Take your time." Elma raised the rifle, her movements careful and deliberate. Cade watched her settle into the stance he'd shown her, watched her breathe the way he'd explained. She fired. The recoil knocked her back a step and the shot went wide, missing the bottle by 3 feet. "Damn," she muttered. "First shot's always rough. Try again." They spent the next hour burning through ammunition. Elma's shoulder would be bruised come morning. The rifle kicked hard and she was still too thin to absorb it well, but she never complained, never quit. Even when she missed shot after shot after shot, she just reloaded and tried again. "You're pulling left," Cade said after the 10th miss, anticipating the recoil. "How do I stop?" "You don't think about it, just let it happen." "That doesn't make sense." "I know, do it anyway." She gave him a look that said she thought he was full of it, but she raised the rifle again. This time, when she fired, she didn't flinch. The bottle shattered. Elma's eyes went wide. "I hit it." "You did. I actually hit it." The joy in her voice was so pure, so unguarded, that Cade felt something crack open in his chest. This was what she should have been all along, someone who got excited about small victories, who felt proud of her accomplishments, who knew she was capable of more than just surviving. "Want to go again?" he asked. "Hell yes." They kept at it until the light started to fail. By the end, Elma had hit 4 out of 10 shots. Not great, but miles better than where she'd started. Walking back to the cabin, she cradled the rifle like it was something precious. "Thank you," she said. "You did the work." "But you showed me how." She glanced at him. "Why are you doing all this?" "All what?" "Teaching me. Treating me like I matter. You could have just—" She paused. Most men would have expected different things by now. Cade stopped walking. "I'm not most men. And you're not here to be used. Not by me, not by anyone. The sooner you get that through your head, the better off we'll both be." Elma studied him in the fading light. "I'm starting to." "Good." That night, Elma didn't immediately start cleaning after dinner. Instead, she sat at the table with Cade, watching him maintain his hunting knife. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why do you live up here alone?" It was the first personal question she'd asked him. Cade considered deflecting, decided she'd earned honesty. "Used to be a different person," he said slowly. "Did things I'm not proud of. Army, mostly. Then some other work after that didn't sit right with my conscience. Came up here to get away from all of it." "Do you regret it, coming up here?" "Not for a second." "Even now? With me here?" He looked at her directly. "Especially now." She blushed, actually blushed, and looked away. "You're strange. You know that?" "Been told that before." "I mean it, though. You're not like other men." "That a compliment?" "Highest one I know how to give." They fell into comfortable silence. Outside, an owl called through the darkness. The fire crackled and settled. "Cade?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad it was you, that day in town. I'm glad it was you." The words hit him with unexpected force. He'd spent 2 weeks trying not to think too hard about what he'd done, about whether he'd made things better or just different. But hearing her say it, hearing the certainty in her voice, somehow made it all right. "Me too," he said quietly. Elma smiled and stood collecting the dishes. But this time, when she cleaned, it looked less like desperate productivity and more like simple routine. Like she was taking care of their space because she wanted to, not because she had to prove her worth. Progress came in inches, Cade had thought that first week. But watching Elma now, watching her move through the cabin with growing confidence, watching her smile more easily, watching her become someone instead of just surviving, he realized it was more than inches. It was miles. And they'd barely started. The next morning, Cade woke to find Elma already outside, pacing off dimensions for her garden. She'd found stakes somewhere and was driving them into the ground to mark corners. "Starting early," he called from the porch. "Ground's finally soft enough." She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "Come tell me if this is too ambitious." He joined her, looking at the space she'd marked out. It was bigger than he'd expected, easily 20 feet by 30. "That's a lot of garden," he said. "I've got a lot of seeds." She grinned. "Unless you think it's too much. I think if you're willing to do the work, plant as big as you want." "I'm willing." They spent the day preparing the soil, breaking up the hard-packed earth with a mattock and rake. Elma worked until her hands blistered, refused the gloves Cade offered, and kept going. "You're going to hurt yourself," he warned. "Already hurt. Might as well have something to show for it." By evening, they'd turned half the plot. Elma's face was flushed with exertion, dirt smudged across her cheek, her braid coming loose. She looked alive. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Cade agreed. They finished the plot over the next 3 days, then spent another 2 amending the soil with compost from the goat pen. Elma planned out where each plant would go with the same meticulous attention she brought to everything else. When planting day finally came, she worked through it with reverent care, tucking each seed into the earth like she was putting children to bed. "You think they'll grow?" she asked, standing back to survey her work. "If you take care of them, yeah." "I will. I promise I will." Cade believed her. That night, after dinner, Elma did something unexpected. Instead of sitting across from Cade at the table like she usually did, she moved to the chair beside him, not quite touching, but closer than before. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, it's okay." They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just existing in the same space. At some point, Elma's shoulder came to rest against his. Cade didn't move away. Through the open window, the mountain breathed around them. Wind in the pines, the creek's constant whisper, the distant call of something wild and free. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt like home. Spring came to the mountain in fits and starts. Warm days followed by cold snaps that threatened the early shoots in Elma's garden. She checked on them obsessively, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, kneeling in the dirt to examine each fragile green stem like it held the secrets of the universe. "They're not going anywhere," Cade said one morning, watching her from the porch. "Frost last night. Had to make sure they survived." "And?" She stood, brushing dirt from her knees, a smile breaking across her face. "They're tougher than they look. Wonder where they get that from." Elma threw a clod of dirt at him. He dodged it easily, laughing. This was new too, the teasing, the casual way she'd started throwing things at him when he said something that made her blush or roll her eyes. The first time she'd done it, she'd immediately frozen, terror flashing across her face like she expected him to hit her back. But Cade had just picked up the pine cone she'd thrown and lobbed it into the woods, and after a minute her shoulders had relaxed. Now she did it without thinking. Progress. The shooting lessons continued every few days. Elma's aim had improved to the point where she rarely missed anymore, her stance confident and natural. She'd stopped flinching at the recoil, had learned to breathe through the shot, to let her body absorb the kick instead of fighting it. "You're better than me now," Cade admitted one afternoon after she'd hit 8 targets in a row. "Liar." "Not lying. Watch." He took the rifle, sighted down at a bottle 50 yards out, and fired. The bottle exploded. "See?" "Same thing," Elma said. "Now, watch this." Cade moved the bottle another 20 yards back and handed her the rifle. She studied the distance, made a minute adjustment to her stance, and fired. The bottle shattered. "Your turn," she said smugly. Cade tried the same shot and missed by inches. "Told you," Elma said, grinning wide enough to show teeth. "I'm better." "Don't get cocky." Too late. But her confidence wasn't just about shooting. It bled into everything else. She spoke more freely now, offered opinions without being asked, made decisions about the cabin and the garden and meals without constantly checking if it was all right. She'd stopped calling him sir entirely, had started calling him out when he was being stubborn or stupid, had developed a sharp wit that caught him off guard more often than not. One evening, after burning dinner because he'd insisted he could handle it while she worked in the garden, she'd stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and said, "You're many things, Cade Mercer, but a cook ain't one of them. It's not that bad. The goats won't eat it. I tried." He'd laughed so hard he'd nearly fallen out of his chair. The garden grew. The days grew longer. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Cade realized he was in trouble. The kind of trouble that started with noticing how Elma's eyes crinkled when she smiled, The kind that made him hyper-aware of every time she stood close to him, every casual touch of her hand on his arm, every moment she chose to sit beside him instead of across from him. He was falling for her. Had probably been falling for weeks, if he was honest with himself. But honesty was dangerous because it meant admitting he wanted something he had no right to want. She was 18 years old, had been through hell, had just barely started figuring out who she was without someone controlling her. The last thing she needed was him complicating things with feelings she might not share, and definitely didn't need the pressure of navigating. So Cade kept his mouth shut and tried to ignore the way his heart kicked up whenever she laughed. It was harder than it should have been. Late May brought warm weather that stuck around long enough to feel permanent. The garden exploded with growth, tomato plants climbing the stakes Cade had built, bean vines wrapping around strings, lettuce forming tight heads in neat rows. Elma spent hours out there, weeding and watering and talking to the plants like they could hear her. Maybe they could. They seemed to grow better when she did it. "You're going to have more vegetables than you know what to do with," Cade said, watching her tie up a particularly ambitious tomato plant. "Good, we can preserve them for winter." "We?" She looked up and something flickered in her expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or fear that she'd assumed too much. "I mean, if I'm still here. For winter." Cade's chest tightened. "You planning on leaving?" "No. But I didn't know if you'd want me to stay that long." "Elma." He waited until she met his eyes. "You can stay as long as you want. That was the deal from day one. Things change." "Not that. Never that." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay. I'll stay for winter and after, if that's still all right." "It's all right." Something passed between them then, something warm and unspoken that made Elma's cheeks flush before she turned back to her tomatoes. Cade retreated to the cabin before he could do something stupid like tell her exactly how all right it was. June arrived with thunderstorms that rolled through every afternoon like clockwork. Elma had stopped being afraid of them, though she still preferred to be inside when they hit. They'd developed a routine. When the sky darkened and the first rumbles started, they'd both head for the cabin, Cade with whatever work he'd been doing outside, and Elma with dirt under her nails and seeds in her pockets. They'd sit at the table, or sometimes on the porch if the rain wasn't blowing sideways, and just exist together while the storm raged. During one particularly violent downpour, with lightning turning the world white every few seconds, Elma asked a question that came out of nowhere. "Did you ever want a family?" Cade looked up from the leather he'd been working. "What?" "Before. When you were younger, did you want the whole thing? Wife, kids, house with a fence?" He set down his tools. "Maybe. Once." "Why?" "Just wondering what you gave up, coming up here." "Didn't give up anything worth keeping." "You don't know that." "I do, though." He leaned back in his chair. "I was a different person back then. Angrier, meaner. The kind of man who would have made a terrible husband and a worse father. Coming up here didn't cost me a family. It saved some hypothetical woman and kids from having to deal with my bullshit." Elma traced patterns on the table with one finger. "You're not mean." "Not anymore, but I was." "What changed?" "Time. Distance. Realizing that being angry all the time was just another way of being weak." He paused. "And maybe having someone around who reminds me there's better ways to be." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Cade felt something shift in the air between them. "I think you're selling yourself short," she said quietly. "I think you're being generous." "Maybe," she smiled, "but I've gotten good at knowing when people are lying to me, and you're not." The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin, everything had gone very still. "Elma," Cade started, not sure where he was going with it. "Yeah?" "I'm glad you're here." "You said that before." "Saying it again, in case you forgot." "I didn't forget." They sat like that, the silence between them comfortable and charged at the same time, until the storm passed and Elma went back outside to check on her garden. Cade stayed at the table, wondering when exactly he'd lost control of his own life and deciding he didn't particularly mind. July came in hot and stayed that way. The garden produced more than Elma had predicted. Tomatoes by the bushel, beans in endless waves, squash that seemed to multiply overnight. They ate fresh vegetables with every meal, and Elma started the preservation process, canning and drying anything they couldn't consume immediately. You know how to do all this? Kate asked, watching her work through another batch of tomatoes. Ma taught me before she died. Only good things she ever gave me. It was the first time she'd mentioned her mother. Kate filed it away, didn't push. She'd be proud, he said instead, seeing what you've done here. Elma's hand stilled on the jar she was filling. You think? I know. She smiled, soft and sad at the same time, and went back to work. They settled into summer like it was a permanent state, days bleeding into each other in the best possible way. Cade trapped and hunted, maintained the fence lines, kept the cabin in good repair. Elma tended her garden, cooked meals that got better every week, and practiced with the rifle until she could hit targets Cade wasn't sure he could manage. Evenings they spent on the porch, watching the sun paint the western peaks in shades of orange and purple. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Both were equally good. One night, Elma broke a long silence with a question that made Cade's heart stutter. What happens if my father comes back? He'd been wondering when she'd ask. Virgil had stayed away for months now, but men like him didn't just disappear. They festered. Depends, Cade said carefully. What do you want to happen? I want him gone, forever. Then that's what happens. You make it sound simple. It is simple. He shows up, we send him away. He doesn't take no for an answer, we make him take it. Elma pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. I used to be scared of him, terrified, really. He'd come home drunk, and I'd hide in my room and pray he'd forget I existed. And now? Now I'm just angry. She rested her chin on her knees. Is that wrong? Being angry instead of scared? No, anger's useful, keeps you sharp. He sold me, Cade, like I was a horse or a sack of grain. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised, because that's how he'd always treated me, like I was worth exactly what someone would pay. The pain in her voice made Cade's hands curl into fists. You're worth more than he could ever understand. I'm starting to believe that. Good. Keep believing it. She turned her head to look at him, her profile soft in the fading light. If he comes back, I want to face him, not hide behind you. Elma, I mean it. I need to. Need to show him I'm not that scared girl anymore. Cade wanted to argue, wanted to promise he'd handle it so she wouldn't have to, but he recognized the steel in her voice, the determination that had been growing stronger every day. All right, he said, but I'm there with you, not in front of you, just with you. Deal. They shook on it, her hand small and calloused in his, and Cade hoped like hell Virgil had the sense to stay away. August brought the first hints of fall, cooler mornings, leaves just starting to turn at the higher elevations. Elma's garden hit its peak production, and they spent long days harvesting and preserving everything they could. We're going to eat well this winter, she said one evening, surveying the shelves now packed with jars of vegetables and dried herbs. You did good. We did good. Cade didn't correct her, even though the garden had been 90% her effort. If she wanted to share the credit, he'd take it. They were cleaning up after dinner when Delilah started braying in the barn, a sharp, aggressive sound that made both of them freeze. Something's wrong, Elma said. Cade was already moving toward the rifle. Stay here. Like hell. She grabbed the other rifle from its rack, checking it was loaded with practiced ease. Cade wanted to argue, but didn't have time. They stepped onto the porch together just as a figure stumbled into the clearing. Virgil Harlan looked worse than he had 3 months ago. Thinner, dirtier, with the kind of desperate energy that came from being at the end of a very short rope. He swayed slightly, definitely drunk, and his eyes had the unfocused glaze of someone who'd been drinking for days. There she is, he slurred, pointing at Elma. There's my girl. Elma's grip tightened on the rifle, but her voice came out steady. I'm not your girl. Sure you are. I made you, didn't I? You sold me, remember? Virgil laughed, the sound ugly and wet. And now I want more money. Figure you owe me that much. Been up here playing house while I'm starving in town. You drunk your money away, Cade said flatly. That's not our problem. Wasn't talking to you, mountain man. Virgil's eyes never left Elma. This is between me and my daughter. Former daughter, Elma corrected. You signed the paper. Papers can be unsigned. He took a step forward. Just need a little more cash and I'll forget you exist. Final transaction. No. The word came out hard and clear. Virgil blinked like he'd been slapped. What did you say? I said no. Elma raised the rifle, not pointing it at him, but making it clear she could. You don't get any more money. You don't get anything. You need to leave. You ungrateful little... Careful, Cade warned. But Virgil was too drunk or too stupid to listen. He lunged toward the porch, his face twisted with rage. Elma didn't hesitate. She brought the rifle up smooth and fast, sighting down the barrel at her father's chest. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. Stop, she said. Virgil stopped. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was Virgil's ragged breathing and the wind through the pines. You wouldn't, Virgil said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Try me. Something in her tone must have convinced him she meant it. The fight drained out of him all at once, leaving him looking small and pathetic in the fading light. You've changed, he said, and it sounded like an accusation. Yes. Gotten hard, mean, gotten strong. There's a difference. Virgil spat in the dirt. This ain't over. It is, Cade said, stepping forward. You got two choices. Walk away now and don't come back, or find out exactly how far we're willing to go to protect what's ours. She's not yours. No, Cade agreed. She's hers. And you lost any claim to her the second you put a price on her head. Virgil looked between them, something ugly working behind his eyes. But whatever he saw there must have warned him off because he took a step back. Then another. You'll regret this, he said, the words automatic and empty. Doubt it, Elma replied. They watched him stumble back down the mountain trail until the darkness swallowed him whole. Even then, Elma kept the rifle raised, her body coiled tight. He's gone, Cade said quietly. She lowered the rifle slowly. For now. You did good. I wanted to shoot him. Her voice shook slightly. When he came at us, I wanted to pull the trigger. But you didn't. Because he's not worth it. Not worth the bullet, or the guilt, or any of it. She turned to look at Cade. Am I a bad person for thinking it, though? No, you're human. She nodded, then walked back into the cabin without another word. Cade followed, securing the door behind them. Elma set the rifle back in its rack with careful precision, then stood there staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Hey, Cade said. She didn't respond. He moved closer, not touching, just there. You faced him down. Didn't hide, didn't back down. That took guts. Didn't feel brave, felt angry. Same thing sometimes. She laughed, short and sharp. You said that before, about the mule. Still true. Elma turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm not scared of him anymore. I thought I would be, but I'm not. I'm just done. Is that weird? No, that's healthy. The tears spilled over then, but she was smiling through them. He looked so small. All this time I've been carrying him around like this huge monster, and when he showed up, he just looked like a sad old drunk who couldn't let go of his own failures. That's all he ever was. You just couldn't see it before. I can now. Cade reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. You're stronger than you know. I'm starting to figure that out. They stood like that for a moment, close enough that Cade could count her freckles, far enough that he could still pretend this was just comfort between friends. Then Elma closed the distance and hugged him. It wasn't calculated or slow. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. Cade froze for half a second, then returned it, one hand coming up to rest between her shoulder blades. She felt small in his arms, but not fragile. Never fragile. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? Being there. Not taking over, just being there. Always. She pulled back after a minute, wiping her eyes and laughing at herself. Sorry, I'm a mess. You're perfect. The word was out before Cade could stop it. Elma's eyes went wide, her cheeks flushing pink. I'm not. You are, he said firmly. Brave and strong and more capable than you give yourself credit for. And I'm proud as hell to know you. She stared at him like he'd spoken another language. Then very quietly, nobody's ever said they're proud of me before. Then they were fools. You keep saying that. Keep being right. Elma smiled, soft and genuine, and Cade felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. The moment stretched, warm and fragile, until Elma finally stepped back and cleared her throat. I should. I'm tired. Long day. Yeah, get some rest. She nodded and moved toward the bed, then paused. Cade? Yeah? I meant what I said before, about staying, through winter and after. I remember. Good. Just wanted to make sure. She climbed into bed, fully clothed again. Some habits died hard, and pulled the blankets up. Cade settled by the fire, his mind too wired to sleep despite the late hour. He kept seeing Elma with that rifle raised, her voice steady, her stance sure. Kept hearing the certainty when she'd told her father she'd changed. She had changed. They both had. This mountain cabin that had been a hiding place for a broken man had somehow become a home for two people learning how to be whole again. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Elma woke before Cade, still did, probably always would, and had coffee ready when he finally dragged himself upright. Sleep all right? She asked, handing him a cup. Well enough, you? Better than I expected. They drank in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb over the eastern peaks through the window. You think he'll come back? Elma asked eventually. Honestly? No, he's a coward. Cowards don't come back after being face down. Hope you're right. Usually am. She threw a wadded-up dish rag at him. He caught it one-handed, grinning. The day progressed like any other, chores and meals and work that needed doing. But something had shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. There was a lightness now, like a weight they hadn't known they were carrying had finally been lifted. Elma hummed while she worked in the garden. Actually hummed, some tune Cade didn't recognize, but that sounded happy. That afternoon, while Cade was chopping wood, she appeared beside him with her rifle. Feel like some target practice? She asked. Always. They walked to the clearing where they'd spent so many hours. Elma loaded the rifle with smooth confidence, raised it, and fired. The distant bottle exploded. Show off, Cade said. Learned from the best. Lies and flattery, she laughed, reloading. Move that one further back. How far? As far as you can throw it. Cade launched a bottle into the distance, watching it arc through the air and land maybe 70 yards out. An impossible shot for most people. Elma raised the rifle, took her time sighting, and fired. The bottle shattered. Damn, Cade breathed. Told you I was better. Not arguing anymore? They kept at it until the sun started to drop, trading the rifle back and forth, making increasingly difficult shots just to see if they could. By the end, Elma was hitting targets at distances Cade wouldn't have attempted. Walking back, she carried the rifle slung over her shoulder like she'd been born with it there. Feel good? Cade asked. Feels right. She glanced at him. That makes sense? Perfect sense. I used to think guns were scary. Now I think they're just tools. Like anything else, that's exactly what they are. Pa never would have let me near one. Said women shouldn't handle weapons. Your pa was wrong about a lot of things. Understatement of the century. They reached the cabin as the first stars appeared. Inside, Elma started dinner while Cade cleaned the rifles and put them away. The routine of it felt good, domestic and comfortable in ways Cade had never expected to want. You ever think about the future? Elma asked, stirring something on the stove. Sometimes? Why? Just wondering if you have plans beyond just surviving up here. Cade considered the question. Used to think surviving was enough. Now, I'm not so sure. What changed? You did. She turned to look at him, the spoon still in her hand. Me? Yeah, you showed up and suddenly surviving didn't feel like enough anymore. Started wanting things to actually be good instead of just tolerable. What kind of things? He could have deflected. Should have, probably. But something about the way she was looking at him made him want to be honest. A real life. Not just hiding. Building something that matters. With me? The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and full of possibility. If you want, Cade said quietly. Elma set down the spoon and walked over to where he sat at the table. She didn't say anything, just reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I want, she said simply. Cade's heart kicked hard against his ribs. You sure? About you? Yeah. About us? Yeah. About building something here? She squeezed his hand. Absolutely. Elma, I'm twice your age and I don't care. You should care. People will talk. Let them. Her grip tightened. I spent my whole life doing what other people expected, being what they wanted. I'm done with that. This? Us? This is what I want. What if you change your mind? Then I'll tell you. But I won't. She said it with such certainty that Cade almost believed her. Almost. I don't want to take advantage, he said. You're not. You couldn't if you tried. She smiled. Cade, you gave me a place to heal, taught me I was worth more than being useful, showed me I could be strong. You think I don't know the difference between someone taking and someone giving? I just want you to be sure. I am. She pulled his hand to her chest, holding it there. Feel that? My heart's not racing. I'm not scared. I'm just sure. And she was right. Her heartbeat was steady and calm under his palm. Okay, Cade said, because what else could he say? Okay? Yeah, okay. Elma's smile could have lit up the whole mountain. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, quick and sweet, then went back to the stove like she hadn't just turned his entire world sideways. Cade sat there with his hand still warm from where she'd held it, wondering what the hell he'd done to deserve this kind of second chance. Whatever it was, he wasn't going to waste it. That night changed things in ways both obvious and subtle. They didn't suddenly start sharing the bed or acting like newlyweds. Neither of them was built that way. But there was a new ease between them, a settled quality that hadn't existed before. When Elma sat beside Cade now, she'd lean against his shoulder without hesitation. When he passed behind her while she worked, he'd rest a hand briefly on her back, small touches that said more than words could. The autumn deepened around them, the aspens turning gold and the air carrying the sharp promise of winter. Elma's garden gave its final harvest, and they spent long evenings preserving the last of it, working side by side in comfortable rhythm. Think we'll have enough? Elma asked, surveying the shelves packed with jars. Enough to feed a small army. You went overboard. Better too much than too little. Spoken like someone who's been too little. She didn't argue, just smiled and started organizing the jars by type, her hands quick and sure. September gave way to October, and with it came the first real cold snap. Cade woke one morning to find frost coating the windows and Elma already up, standing by the stove with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Morning, he said, his breath misting in the cold cabin. It's freezing. Welcome to mountain winter. This is just the beginning. She turned to look at him, eyebrows raised. It gets worse? A lot worse. Come January, you'll think this was tropical. Great, she muttered, but she was smiling. Cade got the fire built up properly while Elma made coffee. They huddled close to the heat, hands wrapped around their cups, watching the sun slowly burn off the frost outside. We should go to town soon, Cade said. Stock up on supplies before the heavy snow comes. Elma's smile faded. Do I have to go? No, but people are going to talk either way. Might as well let them see you're all right. I don't care what they think. I know, but showing up, looking healthy and happy, that's better than any words could be. She considered this, chewing her bottom lip. You really think it'll help? Think it'll shut up the worst of the gossip. Some folks need to see with their own eyes that you're not locked in my basement. You don't have a basement. They don't know that. Elma laughed despite herself. Fine, but if anyone says anything stupid, I'm leaving. Fair enough. They rode down 2 days later, Elma sitting behind Cade on Delilah with her arms wrapped around his waist. The trail was slick with fallen leaves and morning dew, but the mule navigated it without trouble. Town appeared the same as always, tired buildings, dusty street, people going about their business with the grim determination of those who had nowhere better to be. But the moment Cade and Elma rode in, conversation stopped. People stared. Ignore them, Cade said quietly. Trying. He tied Delilah outside the general store and helped Elma down. She stood close to him, not hiding, but not comfortable either. Inside, Mrs. Hutchinson looked up from her ledger and her face transformed into something like relief. Elma Harlan, she said. Look at you. It's just Elma now. Elma said quietly. Don't want his name anymore. Can't say I blame you. Mrs. Hutchinson came around the counter, studying Elma with sharp eyes. You look well, healthy. I am. Good. That's good. The old woman's gaze shifted to Cade. What can I get you folks? They spent the next hour gathering supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, lamp oil, ammunition, everything they'd need to weather the winter. Mrs. Hutchinson helped without comment, though Cade noticed her watching Elma carefully, like she was cataloging every movement and expression. Other customers came and went, most of them staring. A few nodded politely. One woman, the blacksmith's wife, actually smiled at Elma and asked how she was doing. Fine, thank you, Elma said, surprised. Glad to hear it. You look good. It was a small thing, but Cade saw Elma's shoulders straighten a little. They were loading their purchases onto Delilah when trouble found them. Well, well, the mountain man and his purchase. Cade turned slowly. 3 men stood in the street, the same ones who'd confronted him months ago, plus 2 others. The blacksmith's apprentice was front and center, his face twisted in a sneer. Move along, Cade said flatly. Or what? You'll hide behind the sheriff again? I'll handle my own problems, thanks. The apprentice took a step forward. See, that's what bothers me. You come down here, buy a girl like she's property, and everyone's supposed to pretend that's normal? I didn't buy her, Cade said, his voice dangerously quiet. I got her away from a man who was selling her. There's a difference. That what you tell yourself? Elma moved before Cade could stop her, stepping around him to face the apprentice directly. He saved me, she said, her voice carrying across the street. From my father, from this town, from men like you who think women are things to be owned. So if you've got a problem with how I'm living now, you can take it up with me. The apprentice blinked, clearly not expecting her to speak. I don't have a problem with you. Just don't think it's right, him taking advantage. Taking advantage? Elma laughed, sharp and bitter. You want to talk about taking advantage? How about a father who sold his daughter for drinking money? Or a town full of people who watched it happen and did nothing? Or maybe all the men who would have jumped at the chance to buy me if Cade hadn't. The street had gone completely silent. Everyone within earshot had stopped to listen. You don't know what you're talking about, the apprentice said, but his conviction was wavering. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I lived it. Elma's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. Cade gave me a choice, first one I'd ever had, and I chose to stay with him because he treats me like a person instead of property. So if you're so concerned about my welfare, ask yourself what you did when my father was parading me around town with a price tag. The apprentice's face went red. That's not... I didn't... You did nothing. None of you did. She swept her gaze across the gathered crowd. So don't you dare stand there and pretend you care now. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then Mrs. Hutchinson started clapping. It was slow at first, deliberate, her weathered hands coming together with sharp cracks that echoed off the buildings. Then the blacksmith's wife joined in. Then a few others. Not everyone, but enough. The apprentice looked around, realized he'd lost whatever moral high ground he thought he had, and retreated with his friends, muttering curses under his breath. Elma stood in the middle of the street, breathing hard, looking like she couldn't quite believe what she'd just done. Cade moved to her side. You all right? I think so. She laughed shakily. Did I really just do that? You did. I don't know what came over me. He just made me so angry. Good. Let it out. Mrs. Hutchinson approached, smiling. That was well said, girl. Needed saying, too. Thank you. You take care of yourself up there. The old woman glanced at Cade. Both of you. They finished loading Delilah and left town with Elma still trembling slightly from adrenaline. Halfway up the mountain, she finally spoke. I can't believe I did that. I can. You've been building up to it for months. What if it makes things worse? It won't. You showed them you're not a victim anymore. That's important. I still feel like I'm shaking apart. That's normal. You just stood up to a whole town. She laughed, the sound more steady now. Guess I did. Proud of you. You keep saying that. Keep meaning it. Elma leaned her forehead against his back, her arms tightening around his waist. Thank you. For being there. For not fighting that battle for me. Wasn't my battle to fight. Most men would have stepped in anyway. I'm not most men. No, she agreed softly. You're really not. They reached the cabin as evening settled over the mountains. Inside, Elma moved around with a new energy, putting away supplies and starting dinner with quick, efficient movements. She seemed lighter somehow, like confronting the town had burned away weight she'd been carrying. You know what I realized down there? She said, chopping vegetables. What? I'm not afraid anymore. Of them, of my father, of what people think. I'm just done being afraid. That's a good place to be. Is it weird that it feels strange, not being afraid? No, fear's a habit like anything else, takes time to break. She set down the knife and turned to face him. I don't want to go back to that. To being scared and small and invisible. You won't. How do you know? Because you're not that person anymore. Haven't been for a while now. Elma crossed the cabin and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Kate held her close, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. Thank you, she whispered. For what? Everything, being patient, letting me figure things out, not trying to fix me. You were never broken. I was, though. Just not in ways you could see. Maybe, but you're not anymore. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright. No, I'm not. Then she kissed him. It was tentative at first, uncertain, like she wasn't quite sure if she was allowed. But when Cade kissed her back, gentle and sure, she melted into it with a soft sound that made his heart stutter. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elma's cheeks were flushed and her eyes were wide. Was that okay? She asked. More than okay. Good, because I've been wanting to do that for weeks. Why didn't you? Wasn't sure how. Never kissed anyone before? The admission made Cade's chest tight. You did just fine. Can we do it again? He answered by pulling her close and kissing her properly, taking his time, letting her set the pace. When they finally came up for air, Elma was smiling like the sun had taken up residence in her face. Better than I imagined, she said. You imagined it? A lot. Good to know. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped up in each other, while dinner simmered forgotten on the stove and the world outside faded to nothing. Eventually, Elma pulled back, laughing. Food's burning. Let it. Cade Mercer, we are not wasting good vegetables because you can't keep your hands to yourself. Seemed like you wanted my hands on you. She blushed furiously but didn't deny it. Later, after dinner. Promise? Promise. They ate with hands that kept finding each other across the table, with smiles that neither could quite suppress, with a lightness that made everything taste better. After dinner, they sat on the porch despite the cold, Elma wrapped in a blanket and tucked against Cade's side. Winter's coming fast, she said, watching the stars emerge. Always does up here. I'm not worried. No? We've got food, firewood, each other. What else do we need? Nothing I can think of. She tilted her head back to look at him. You really mean that? Every word. Good. She settled back against him. Because I'm not going anywhere. Wouldn't let you if you tried. Possessive. Little bit. I don't mind. They sat until the cold drove them inside, then settled by the fire, Elma reading aloud from one of Cade's books while he worked on repairing a bridle. The domesticity of it should have felt strange, but instead it felt right in ways Cade couldn't quite articulate. This was what he'd been missing all those years alone. Not just another person, but this person. This particular combination of strength and softness, fire and gentleness, past hurt and future hope. When Elma finally closed the book and announced she was tired, Cade banked the fire and prepared his bedroll as usual. But before he could lie down, Elma's voice stopped him. Cade? Yeah? Sleep in the bed tonight, with me. His heart kicked hard. Elma, just sleep. I want you close. Is that all right? He should have said no, should have maintained the distance he'd carefully kept since that first night. But looking at her face, seeing the vulnerability there mixed with certainty, he couldn't. All right, he said quietly. They lay down together on the narrow bed, Elma curling against his side with her head on his chest. Cade's arm came around her automatically, holding her close. This okay? He asked. Perfect. Not too crowded? I like crowded. He smiled in the darkness. Me too. Elma's breathing evened out after a few minutes, her body going heavy and relaxed against his. Cade lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling, wondering how his life had become this. 6 months ago, he'd been alone, convinced that solitude was the only answer. Now he had this woman in his arms, this fierce, brave, beautiful woman who'd somehow decided he was worth staying for. He didn't deserve it, knew he didn't, but he'd be damned if he didn't do everything in his power to be worthy of the gift she'd given him. October bled into November, and the first real snow came. They woke one morning to find the world transformed, white and silent, and impossibly beautiful. Elma pressed her face to the window like a child, her breath fogging the glass. "It's so much," she breathed. 2 feet, maybe. "We'll get double that come January." "How do we even get around?" "Carefully, and we don't go far." They spent the day digging out paths to the barn and the woodpile, making sure the animals had shelter and food. The work was hard and cold, but Elma attacked it with the same determination she brought to everything else. That night, exhausted and sore, they collapsed into bed together. It had become routine now, sleeping tangled up in each other, Elma's cold feet pressed against Cade's legs, his arms wrapped around her like he could keep the whole world at bay. "Tell me about when you were young," Elma said into the darkness. "Not much to tell." "There's always something." Cade thought for a moment. "My mother used to make bread every Sunday. The smell would fill the whole house. I'd wake up to it and know everything was all right with the world." "What happened to her?" "Fever. I was 12. I'm sorry. Long time ago." Elma's fingers traced patterns on his chest. "My mother died when I was 10. Pa blamed me for it. Said she worked herself to death because I was useless. He was wrong. I know that now. Didn't then." "What was she like, your mother?" "Quiet. Sad, mostly. But sometimes she'd sing while she worked. Had a pretty voice." Elma paused. "I haven't thought about that in years." "Good memory?" "One of the only good ones." They lay in silence for a while, their pasts mingling in the darkness between them. "Cade?" "Yeah? Do you think we're broken, both of us?" "Maybe. Or maybe we're just people who survived things that should have destroyed us." "That's a nicer way of saying it." "It's the truth." She shifted to look at him, her face barely visible in the dim light from the banked fire. "I'm glad we found each other." "Me too. Even if it was in the worst possible way?" "Especially then. Sometimes the worst circumstances lead to the best outcomes." Elma kissed him, soft and sweet, then settled back against his chest. "I love you, just so you know." The words hit Cade like a physical blow. He went completely still. "You don't have to say it back," Elma added quickly. "I just wanted you to know." "Elma, it's okay, really. I know it's complicated and I'm young and we haven't known each other that long, but I do love you, and I wanted to say it." Cade's throat felt tight. "I love you too." "You don't have to." "I'm not saying it because you did. I'm saying it because it's true." He tightened his arms around her. "I love you. Probably have for a while now." She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Really? Really? When did you know?" "When you faced down your father with that rifle, saw you standing there, strong and certain, and realized I was completely gone on you." "That's so weird. I knew when you held my hand during the storm. Earlier than me. I'm smarter than you." Not arguing. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, hearts beating in sync. The future stretched out before them like fresh snow waiting for tracks. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt permanent, solid. They woke together, worked together, ate together, fell asleep together. The cabin that had been built for one person adapted to hold two with surprising ease. Elma started talking about spring, about expanding the garden, maybe getting chickens. Cade found himself planning repairs to the barn, thinking about how to make the cabin warmer for next winter. They were building a life, an actual life, not just surviving. One evening in late November, with snow falling soft and steady outside, Elma brought up something that had clearly been on her mind. "What do we tell people? About us?" Cade looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "What do you want to tell them?" "The truth. That we're together." "They'll talk. Let them. I'm done hiding." "All right, then we tell them the truth." Just like that? Just like that. She smiled. You make everything sound so simple. Because it is. We're two people who care about each other. That's all anyone needs to know. What about the age difference? What about it? You're twice my age. And? And people will say things. People always say things. Question is whether you care. Elma thought about it. No, I don't. I just wanted to make sure you don't. I don't? Good. She moved to sit beside him. Because I'm serious about this. About us. This isn't some temporary thing for me. Not for me either. Promise? Promise. She kissed him, slow and deep, and Cade felt the truth of it settle in his bones. This was permanent. This woman, this life, this unexpected second chance. When they broke apart, Elma was smiling. We should get married, Cade blinked. What? Married. You and me. Make it official. Elma, we don't have to. I know we don't have to. I want to. She took his hands in hers. I want the whole thing. The commitment, the partnership, all of it. Do you? He studied her face, looking for doubt or uncertainty. Found nothing but fierce certainty and love so bright it nearly blinded him. Yeah, he said quietly. I do. Then let's do it. When? Spring. After the snow melts, we'll go to town, find whoever does these things, and make it legal. You sure? More sure than I've ever been about anything. Cade pulled her close, holding her like she might disappear if he didn't. Spring it is. Promise? Promise. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about the future like it was something guaranteed instead of hoped for. And for the first time in his life, Cade let himself believe in it. December came hard and cold, burying the mountain in snow that reached halfway up the cabin walls. They were completely cut off from town, from the world, from everything except each other. It should have felt claustrophobic. Instead, it felt like freedom. They spent the long winter evenings by the fire, Elma teaching herself to read better with Cade's help, Cade teaching her card games and losing more often than he won. They talked about everything and nothing, shared stories from their pasts, made plans for their future. On Christmas Eve, or what they thought was Christmas Eve, time getting fuzzy when you were snowed in, Elma gave Cade a gift she'd made in secret, a shirt she'd sewn from fabric she'd been saving, with stitches so small and perfect they were almost invisible. When did you make this? He asked, stunned. While you were sleeping, or out with the animals, took forever. It's perfect. Try it on. It fit like it was made for him, because it was. Thank you, Cade said, his voice rough. You're welcome. He gave her his gift, a knife he'd made himself, with a handle carved from deer antler and her initials etched into the blade. Elma's eyes went wide. You made this? Took a while to get it right. She tested the edge, found it razor sharp. It's beautiful. So are you. They spent that night wrapped up in each other, the fire burning low, the world outside frozen and silent. And in that small cabin on a mountain far from everything, two people who'd been broken found themselves becoming whole again. Together. Winter held the mountain in its grip through January and most of February, the snow piling so high that the world became nothing but white silence and the warm interior of the cabin. They burned through firewood at a steady pace, rationed their supplies carefully, and learned what it meant to live in such close quarters with another person. It wasn't always easy. Elma had habits that drove Cade crazy, reorganizing things he'd already organized, humming the same 3 songs on endless repeat, leaving wet footprints across the floor he'd just swept. Cade had his own issues, brooding silences that lasted hours, a stubborn refusal to admit when he was wrong, a tendency to wake at dawn no matter how late they'd stayed up. They had their first real fight in early February. It started over something stupid. Cade had moved Elma's sewing supplies to make room for his trapping gear, and she'd snapped at him for touching her things without asking. He'd fired back that it was his cabin, and he could move whatever he wanted. She'd gone cold and quiet, that terrible blankness sliding back over her face like armor. Don't do that, Cade said. Do what? Disappear. We're having a fight, not a war. You're allowed to be angry. I am angry. Then show it. Yell at me. Throw something. Just don't go blank like that. Why not? Safer that way? Safer for who? Elma's hands clenched into fists. For me. For both of us. You want me to yell? Fine. It's not just your cabin anymore. It's ours. And you don't get to move my stuff around like I'm still some guest who doesn't matter. I never said you don't matter. You didn't have to say it. You just assumed you could rearrange things without asking because deep down you still think of this as your space that I'm borrowing. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. That's not fair. Isn't it? You still call it my cabin when you talk to people. My mountain. Like I'm just visiting. Cade opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right. He'd been doing exactly that without realizing it. You're right, he said quietly. Elma blinked. What? You're right. I've been treating this like it's mine, and you're just here, but it's not. It's ours. The cabin, the mountain, all of it. Our home. The fight went out of her all at once. You mean that? Yeah, I do, and I'm sorry for moving your things without asking. She sagged against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. I'm sorry for snapping. It's just, sometimes I still feel like I'm waiting for you to decide you don't want me here anymore. That's never going to happen. You can't know that. I can. Because I love you. And because I'm not stupid enough to let go of the best thing that's ever happened to me. Elma's eyes filled with tears. Even when I'm being difficult? Especially then. Means you're comfortable enough to be yourself instead of what you think I want. She crossed the cabin and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. I love you too, even when you're being a stubborn ass. I'm always a stubborn ass. I know. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, learning that fights didn't mean the end of things. They just meant both people cared enough to be honest. The thaw came in early March, sudden and dramatic. The snow melted in rushing streams that turned the mountain into a maze of mud and slush. Elma's garden plot became visible again, dead stalks from last year poking through the wet earth. Can I start planting soon? She asked, standing at the window and watching the water run. Another few weeks. Ground needs to dry out first. I want to do double this year, maybe add herbs too. Whatever you want. She turned to look at him. Our garden. What? Not my garden. Ours. Right? Cade smiled. Right. Our garden. They made their first trip to town in mid-March, when the trail was finally passable again. Elma rode behind Cade, her arms wrapped around his waist, the knife he'd made her strapped to her belt. Nervous? He asked. A little, but ready. The town looked different after months away. Smaller, somehow. Less important. They tied Delilah outside the general store and went in together, hands linked. Mrs. Hutchinson looked up and her face split into a genuine smile. Well, look at you two. Survived the winter. Barely, Elma said, grinning. More than barely from the looks of it. You both look healthy. They gathered supplies. More seeds for Elma's expanded garden, ammunition, flour, sugar, everything they'd need for the next few months. While Mrs. Hutchinson tallied it up, Cade cleared his throat. We're looking to get married. You know who handles that sort of thing? Mrs. Hutchinson's eyebrows shot up. Married? If it's legal, Elma added, we want to do it proper. The old woman studied them both, then nodded slowly. Judge Morrison does marriages when he's in town, but he won't be back until May. May's fine, Cade said. We can wait. You sure about this? Mrs. Hutchinson asked, her gaze settling on Elma. Not being pressured? More sure than I've ever been about anything. Elma squeezed Cade's hand. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. Then I'm happy for you both. Mrs. Hutchinson finished the tally. Judge usually comes first week of May. I'll send word when I know for certain. They left town feeling lighter, more settled. The whispers still followed them, but they mattered less now. People could think whatever they wanted. Elma and Cade knew the truth. April brought warm days and cool nights, perfect weather for working the land. Elma threw herself into the garden with renewed energy, expanding it beyond even her ambitious plans from last year. Cade built new raised beds, reinforced the fence to keep out deer, and watched her work with something like awe. She'd changed so much from the frightened girl he'd brought up the mountain. This woman who laughed easily, who made decisions without asking permission, who planned for the future like it was guaranteed. She was someone entirely new. Or maybe she'd always been this person, just buried under years of being told she was worthless. What are you staring at? Elma asked, catching him watching. You. Why? Because I like looking at you. She blushed but smiled. Sap. You like it? Maybe. They worked side by side until evening, then sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western peaks in shades of orange and gold. Delilah grazed nearby, the goats bleated in their pen, and the creek whispered its endless song through the trees. This is perfect, Elma said quietly. Yeah. I never thought I'd have this. A home, someone who loves me, a future worth looking forward to. You deserve it. So do you. She leaned against his shoulder. We both do. Word came in late April that Judge Morrison would be in town the second week of May. Mrs. Hutchinson sent a note via a passing trapper, and Elma read it 3 times before setting it down with shaking hands. It's real, she said. Getting cold feet? No, just... It's really happening. We can wait if you want. I don't want to wait. She looked at him. Do you? No. Then we do it, second week of May. They spent the intervening weeks preparing. Elma made herself a dress from fabric they'd bought on their last trip to town. Simple but beautiful, cream-colored with tiny buttons down the back. Cade cleaned up his one good suit, the one he hadn't worn in 5 years, and tried not to think about how his hands shook when he looked at it. He was getting married, actually married, at 40 years old after spending most of his life convinced he'd die alone on this mountain. The night before they were set to leave for town, Elma found him on the porch, staring at nothing. You okay? She asked. Yeah, just thinking. About? How different my life looks now compared to a year ago. She sat beside him. Good different or bad different? Best different. Scary different. You're scared? Terrified, he admitted. What if I mess this up? What if I'm not good enough at being a husband? Cade? She took his hand. You've been more of a partner to me in the last year than most people get in a lifetime. You're going to be fine. You don't know that. I do. Because you care enough to be scared. The men who mess it up are the ones who think they've got it all figured out. He looked at her. This woman who'd somehow become wiser than her years should allow. How'd you get so smart? Had a good teacher. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow they'd ride down the mountain and make it official. But tonight, this moment, this was enough. The morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a gift. Elma wore her new dress, her hair braided and pinned up with wildflowers she'd picked that morning. Cade wore his suit, feeling stiff and uncomfortable but willing to endure it for her. They rode down together, Delilah picking her way carefully along the still muddy trail. Neither of them spoke much, but Elma's arms around his waist felt sure and steady. Town was busier than usual. Apparently word had spread about the wedding. People lined the street outside the courthouse, some friendly, some curious, a few openly hostile. Cade ignored them all, helping Elma down and offering his arm. Ready? He asked. Ready. Judge Morrison was waiting inside, a stern-looking man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes. He looked them both over carefully. You understand what you're doing? He asked Elma directly. Yes, sir. You're young. Awful young to be making this kind of decision. I'm old enough to know my own mind. And he's not forcing you? No coercion? Elma's eyes flashed. The only person who ever forced me to do anything was my father. This man? He gave me choices, still does, every day. Morrison studied her, then nodded. Fair enough? He opened his book. Let's begin. The ceremony was simple, almost perfunctory. Morrison read the words in a dry voice, asked them both if they agreed to the terms, and pronounced them married before Cade had fully processed what was happening. You may kiss your bride, Morrison said, almost as an afterthought. Cade turned to Elma, saw her smiling up at him with joy written clear across her face, and kissed her like it was the first and last time all at once. When they broke apart, the handful of people who'd crowded into the courthouse were clapping. Mrs. Hutchinson stood in the front row, tears streaming down her weathered face. The blacksmith's wife was smiling. Even Sheriff Dawes had shown up, nodding his approval. Congratulations, Morrison said, handing them the certificate. May you have a long and happy life together. They signed their names, Elma's handwriting still unpracticed but determined, Cade's bold and sure, and walked out into the sunlight as husband and wife. The crowd outside had grown. Some people threw rice. Others just stared. Cade spotted the blacksmith's apprentice in the back, his face twisted in disgust, but he didn't care. Let them look. Let them judge. He had Elma, and she had him, and that was all that mattered. Mrs. Hutchinson caught them before they could leave, pressing a package into Elma's hands. "Wedding gift," she said. "Just some fabric and thread, but I thought you could use it." "Thank you," Elma said, her voice thick with emotion. "You take care of each other now." "We will." They rode back up the mountain in the afternoon light, both of them quiet but content. The certificate was tucked safely in Cade's jacket, proof that what they had was real and legal and permanent. Halfway home, Elma started laughing. "What?" Cade asked. "We did it. We actually did it." "Seems like." "I'm married. To you. That's insane." "Regretting it already?" "Never. Just, it feels too good to be real." "It's real. I've got the paper to prove it." She hugged him tighter. "I love you, husband." The word sent warmth flooding through his chest. "I love you too, wife." They reached the cabin as evening settled over the mountains, and Cade helped Elma down, then swept her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" she squealed. "Carrying you over the threshold. It's tradition." "That's for new houses." "It's a new start, close enough." He carried her inside, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the middle of their home. Because it was their home now, officially and completely. Not his cabin that she lived in. Their place. Their life. That night they celebrated quietly, eating the special meal Elma had prepared before they left, drinking the bottle of whiskey Cade had been saving for years, talking about everything and nothing until the fire burned low. "What do we do now?" Elma asked, curled up against him in their bed. "Whatever we want." "That's simple." "That's simple." "I want to make this place even better. Expand the garden more, maybe get those chickens I've been talking about. Build something permanent." "Then that's what we'll do." She tilted her head to look at him. "You never had big dreams before I came along, did you?" "Didn't see the point. Surviving was hard enough without adding expectations." "And now?" "Now I want everything. Long life, full house, growing old with you. The whole impossible thing." "It's not impossible." "Feels like it sometimes. The best things usually do." Spring gave way to early summer, and they threw themselves into making the homestead everything they'd talked about. Elma's garden exploded with growth, even bigger than last year. Cade built a chicken coop, and they bought 6 hens from a farmer passing through. The animals thrived, the land produced, and the cabin that had once held one lonely man now burst with life. They had visitors occasionally. Mrs. Hutchinson rode up once to check on them, staying for dinner and marveling at how well Elma looked. The blacksmith's wife came by to trade eggs for fresh vegetables, and surprised them both by being genuinely friendly. Even Sheriff Dawes stopped in one afternoon, ostensibly to check that everything was legal, but really just to see that they were all right. "You two are the talk of the valley," he said, accepting coffee. "Good talk or bad talk?" Elma asked. "Mixed, but more good than you'd think. Some folks respect what you've built here." "And the others?" "They'll come around or they won't. Either way, you seem happy." "We are," Cade said simply. Dawes nodded. "That's all that matters then." Word filtered up occasionally about Virgil. He'd been arrested for public drunkenness twice, was living in a boarding house on charity, had tried to get money from the church and been turned away. Each piece of news about his decline should have felt like victory, but instead it just made Elma sad. "I don't hate him anymore," she told Cade one evening. "I thought I would. Thought I'd want him to suffer, but I just feel sorry for him." "That's because you're better than he ever was. Or maybe I just don't have room for hate anymore. Too busy being happy." "That works too." July brought heat that baked the mountain, and with it came a visitor neither of them expected. Cade was working on repairs to the barn roof when he heard Delilah bray a warning. He climbed down to find a man standing in the clearing, thin, gray-haired, leaning heavily on a walking stick. Virgil. But not the Virgil who'd stumbled up drunk and angry months ago. This man looked old, broken, like life had finally beaten him down past the point of fighting. "Cade," he said, his voice rough. "I need to talk to my daughter." "You lost the right to call her that." "I know, just, please, 5 minutes." Cade wanted to send him away, wanted to protect Elma from whatever fresh hell her father had conjured. But before he could, Elma appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "It's all right," she said. "I'll talk to him." "You sure?" "Yeah." Cade stayed close but gave them space, watched as Virgil took in the sight of his daughter, healthy, strong, armed, and completely unafraid. "You look good," Virgil said. "What do you want?" "To apologize." Elma's eyebrows shot up. "What?" "I was a terrible father, worse than terrible. I sold you like you were nothing because I was too drunk and stupid to see what I had." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." "You're drunk now," Elma said flatly. "Sober 3 weeks. First time in years." She studied him, and Cade saw her weighing whether to believe him. "Why now? Why bother apologizing?" "Because I'm dying. Doctor says I've got maybe 6 months. Liver shot." Virgil coughed, a wet, horrible sound. "And I didn't want to die knowing I never said it. That I'm sorry. That you deserved better. That everything bad that happened was my fault, not yours." Silence stretched between them. Elma's grip on the rifle didn't waver. "I forgive you," she said finally. Virgil's eyes widened. "What?" "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I'm done carrying you around, done letting what you did define who I am." She lowered the rifle. "You were a terrible father. You hurt me in ways I'm still learning to heal from, but I'm not going to let that poison the rest of my life." "Elma, I hope you find peace. I really do. But I don't want to see you again. This is goodbye." Virgil nodded slowly, tears tracking down his weathered face. "You turned out better than I had any right to hope for." "I know." He turned to leave, then paused. "He good to you? The mountain man?" "His name is Cade, and yes, he's the best thing that ever happened to me." "Good. That's good." They watched him walk away, his gait unsteady, his frame bent. When he disappeared down the trail, Elma sagged against the doorframe. Cade moved to her side. "You all right?" "Yeah. Actually, yeah." She looked up at him. "I meant what I said. I forgive him, and it feels lighter. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." "I don't think I'll see him again." "Probably not. And I'm okay with that." She set the rifle aside and took Cade's hand. "Come on. We've got work to do." They spent the rest of the day working side by side, and if Elma was quieter than usual, Cade didn't push. Some things needed to be processed in silence. That night, curled up together in bed, she finally spoke. "Thank you for letting me handle that myself." "It was yours to handle. Most men would have stepped in, protected me whether I wanted it or not." "You don't need protecting. You need partnering. There's a difference." She kissed him, soft and sweet. "I love you." "Love you too." "He's going to die." "Yeah. And I'm sad about it. But not for me, for him. For the life he wasted. That's what makes you better than him." "I hope so." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, the past finally losing its grip on the future. August brought news via a traveling merchant that Virgil Harlan had died. Peacefully in his sleep at the boarding house. There would be no funeral. He'd made no friends and had no family who'd claim him. Elma took the news quietly, nodded once, and went back to her garden. Cade found her there an hour later, sitting among the tomato plants with tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "I thought I'd feel relief, or satisfaction, or something other than this." "What do you feel?" "Sad and free. Both at the same time." She wiped her eyes. "He's gone. Really gone. Can't hurt me anymore. Can't show up and demand things. Just gone." "How does that feel?" "Like closing a door I didn't know was still open." She looked at him. "I'm free, Cade. Actually, completely free." "You've been free for a while now." "I know, but this is different. There's no more looking over my shoulder. No more wondering if he'll come back. It's just us now." "Just us," Cade agreed. She leaned against him, and they sat like that in the garden she'd built, surrounded by growing things and the promise of harvest. The summer deepened, and with it came a rhythm that felt permanent and right. They worked their land, tended their animals, made plans for the future. Elma talked about maybe adding a room onto the cabin, starting a small orchard. Cade researched better irrigation systems, thought about getting a milk cow. They were building something real, something lasting. One evening in late September, with the aspens starting to turn gold and the air carrying the first hint of autumn, Elma made an announcement over dinner. "I think I'm pregnant." Cade's fork clattered to his plate. "What?" "I'm late. Over 2 weeks now. And I've been sick in the mornings." She met his eyes. "I think we're going to have a baby." The world seemed to tilt sideways. A baby. Their baby. The impossibility of it hit him like a fist. "Are you sure?" he managed. "Pretty sure. I'll know more in another few weeks, but..." She smiled nervously. "How do you feel about that?" Cade stood, moved around the table, and pulled her into his arms. Terrified. Happy. Completely unprepared. All of it. She laughed against his chest. "Me too." "We're really doing this? The whole thing?" "Looks like it." He pulled back to look at her, this woman who'd walked into his life like a storm and changed everything. "I love you. I love you too. We're going to be terrible at this. Probably, but we'll figure it out. Together." Together. The baby came in late May, after a labor that lasted 16 hours and left both Cade and Elma exhausted. Mrs. Hutchinson had come up to help, along with a midwife from town, and between the three of them they'd managed. A girl, small but healthy, with dark hair and lungs that worked just fine. Elma held her daughter, their daughter, and cried tears of joy and relief and wonder. "She's perfect," she whispered. "She is," Cade agreed, unable to take his eyes off the tiny face. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months, never settling on anything, but looking at her now, Cade knew. "Hope," he said. "We should call her Hope." Elma smiled. "Hope Mercer. I like that." Hope Elma Mercer. Even better. They brought Hope home 2 days later, and the cabin that had been built for one lonely man now held 3. The first few weeks were chaos. Sleepless nights, constant crying, the terror of being responsible for something so small and fragile. But they figured it out, just like Elma had said they would. Together. The first year passed in a blur of milestones and moments. Hope's first smile, her first tooth, her first word, which was "da," much to Cade's delight and Elma's mock outrage. The cabin expanded with the addition of a second room just big enough for a crib and changing table. The garden thrived, the animals multiplied, and the homestead became something that could actually be called a farm. People from town started coming to them for advice. How to preserve vegetables, how to handle mountain winters, how to make the most of difficult land. Elma helped anyone who asked, generous with her knowledge and her time. They'd become part of the community they'd once been outsiders from. On Hope's first birthday, they had a small gathering. Mrs. Hutchinson came, along with the blacksmith's family, Sheriff Dawes, and a few others who'd shown them kindness over the years. The cabin was full of laughter and noise and life. Watching Elma move through the crowd, their daughter on her hip, Cade was struck by how different everything was. This woman who'd been sold for $50 now stood at the center of her own life, confident and strong, and surrounded by people who respected her. She caught his eye across the room and smiled, that particular smile that was just for him. Later, after everyone had left and Hope was sleeping, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Can you believe we've been married almost 2 years?" Elma asked. "Feels like longer." "Hey, I mean that in a good way, like we've always been this way." She leaned against his shoulder. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I can barely remember what life was like before." "Before me? Before us? Before this?" She gestured at the cabin, the garden, the mountains rising up around them. "Before home. You happy?" "Happier than I ever thought possible." She turned to look at him. "Are you?" "Yeah, more than I deserve." "You deserve everything good that's ever happened to you." "So do you." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their mountain. An owl called from the woods. The creek whispered its endless song. Inside, Hope made small sleeping sounds. "I was thinking," Elma said eventually, "maybe we should have another baby. Give Hope a sibling." Cade raised his eyebrows. "You want to do that all over again?" "I want a family. A real one. The kind I never had growing up." "We already have a family." "I know, but I want more. Want this place full of noise and chaos and love. Cade thought about it, about more children, more noise, more life filling the spaces that had once been empty, about building something that would last beyond just them. All right, he said, let's do it. Yeah? Yeah. Let's fill this mountain with Mercers. Elma grinned and kissed him. I love you. Love you too. The years that followed brought both hardship and joy. A second daughter came, then a son. The cabin expanded again and then again, growing with the family that filled it. Winters were hard, summers were busy, and there were times when money was tight and worry kept them up at night. But they faced it all together. Cade taught his children to track and hunt and shoot. Elma taught them to garden and preserve and make something from nothing. Together they taught them that worth wasn't measured in money or status, that kindness mattered more than strength, that family was what you built, not what you were born into. The children grew. The farm prospered, and the two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way built the best possible life. 20 years after that first day in town, Cade stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching Elma work in a garden that now covered half an acre. She was older now, lines around her eyes and gray starting in her hair, but still beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with appearance. Their oldest daughter was helping her, laughing at something Elma had said. The younger two were down at the creek, their voices carrying up on the wind. This was it. This was everything he'd never known he wanted, everything he'd thought he'd lost the right to have. Elma looked up and caught him watching. She straightened, one hand going to her back. She complained about it aching now after long days in the garden, and smiled. That smile still did things to his heart. She walked over, wiping dirt on her apron, and climbed the porch steps to stand beside him. What are you thinking about? She asked. How you rescued me. I think you have that backwards. No, I really don't. He pulled her close. You showed up and reminded me there was more to life than just surviving, that there was living, building, hoping. We rescued each other. Maybe. Definitely. She leaned against him. Best $50 anyone ever spent. $30. I bargained him down. Even better deal then. They stood like that, watching their children play, watching the sun paint the mountains gold, watching the life they'd built together continue its daily rhythm. The cabin that had been made for one lonely soul now held 5. The mountain that had been a hiding place became a home. And two people who'd been broken found that sometimes the best things in life came from the worst circumstances. Not because the circumstances were good, but because they chose to be. Elma had learned she was worth more than being useful. Cade had learned he was worth more than his past. And together they'd built something that proved worth wasn't about where you came from or what you'd been through. It was about what you did with the chances you were given. And they'd taken their chance, impossible and improbable as it was, and turned it into something beautiful. That evening, after the children were in bed and the fire was banked low, Cade and Elma sat together in the quiet. Outside, the mountain breathed around them, patient and eternal. Happy? Cade asked. Elma didn't even hesitate. Always. And she was. They both were. Because sometimes broken people find each other and build something whole. Sometimes the worst day of your life leads to the best years. Sometimes love shows up in the least likely places and changes everything. This was their story. Not perfect, not easy, but real and true and theirs. And that was more than enough.